Hello, boys and girls. Got another video for you fine folks on the internet today. Another installment in the Matthew Buckley Talks music series. Once again, looking at another fine, fun, early 1960s California surf, rock, hot rod, drag, pop album. Today's selection is Drag City by Jan and Dean, released in November of 1963 on Liberty Records, on vinyl in the US, Canada, and New Zealand. Reissued in 1964 on Domido Records for South Korean import, and not reissued again until 1981 for Japanese markets as part of their Liberty Pop's Best Collection series. And then reissued again in 1987 for the first cassette issue with the title Drag City, The Great Car Songs of Jan and Dean. And in 1990, it was given its first CD issue by C5 Records for UK markets. It was also concurrently reissued on vinyl by the same C5 record label. And most recently in 2012, the album was reissued on CD for Japanese markets as part of their rock famous recording 999 Best and More series. So a little background. I already discussed Jan and Dean's background in my album review a few issues ago, installments ago I should say, in my review of The Little Old Lady from Pasadena. But a little background on this particular album, released, as I said, at the end of November 1963 as the fifth full-length Jan and Dean album, and their third full-length release of 1963. As with their previous two albums, the duo was following in the steps of the trend-setting Beach Boys. After establishing themselves in the late 50s and early 60s as rhythm and blues and doo-wop singers with rock and roll tendencies, Jan and Dean seamlessly transitioned into surf music in the wake of the breakout success of the Beach Boys and the surf music craze that ensued. They would release the album Jan and Dean Take Linda Surfin' in March 1963, the very same month as the Beach Boys' second album, Surfin' USA, would hit record shelves. And this particular album would be released just 1 month after the Beach Boys' hot rod-themed album, Little Deuce Coupe. So just as quickly as they had embraced surf music, Jan and Dean stepped headlong into hot rod and drag music, shifting gears, pardon the pun, from covers of Surfin' Safari to covers of Little Deuce Coupe, and even flat-out rewriting their number one hit single, Surf City, into the drag race-themed anthem, Drag City. Once again, with this album of all hot rod and drag-themed songs, we have an early example of a fully realized concept album. That being said, this isn't exactly anything new for Jan and Dean. I mean, the Surf City and Other Swingin' Cities album itself was a concept album of songs about various hip geographical locations. These might not be particularly heady concepts, but they do fit the bill. So, the record itself, side one opens with the title cut, Drag City, an ode to the hot rod and drag racing culture that informs the concept of the album, opening with the sound effect of a revving engine and squealing car tires. Credited to Jan Berry, Roger Christian, and Brian Wilson. In spite of being a new song and a new concept, this tune is actually a rewrite of Jan and Dean's hit single Surf City. In place of the classic 2 girls for every boy lyric, the duo sing "Burn Up That Quarter Mile." And just as much as its predecessor, the lyrics of the song exemplify a free-spirited, youthful confidence, a carefree attitude and lifestyle. Jan sings, "The DJ's saying on my favorite station, the Drag City races are the fastest in the nation. The wheels are the wildest, and the stalkers are pretty. I'll get my honey, grab some money, and split to Drag City." That just, it's a lovely sentiment. Much of the song's hot rod lingo can be attributed to Roger Christian, a car enthusiast who would collaborate frequently with Brian Wilson, Jan Berry, and most of all Gary Usher in the early 1960s. The song would be issued as Jan and Dean's 18th 45 RPM single in the weeks leading up to the album release, peaking at number 10 on the US Billboard charts. It definitely sets the tone for the rest of the record and sets a new standard for self-reference in Jan and Dean's work from here on out. And most importantly, it's a fun song. The next track, "I Gotta Drive," was written by Roger Christian and popular singer-songwriter Barry Mann. Complete with a dramatic spoken introduction by Jan Berry, we're given the setup for a highly anticipated drag race. His girls come to see him race here at Drag City. I do enjoy the continued conceptual continuity, referencing, the ideas and places that are already established in prior songs. And the backing vocals, also from the Matadors, are standout in this track, echoing the lyrics of the first verse as he sings, and later repeating the title in the next verse. They have dynamite vocal delivery, and it's admittedly more than a bit cheesy, but I do absolutely adore the chorus lyric. "She loves me now, but she's gonna love me more." That's good stuff. The song has a grand arrangement. It's really quite a production. The tracking session featured several Wrecking Crew regulars, drummers Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer, guitarists Glenn Campbell, Al DeLore, David Gates, Bill Pittman, and Tommy Tedesco, bass guitarist Ray Pullman, and pianist Leon Russell. Shortly after the album release, Jan Berry would produce a cover of the track for single release by the Matadors, released on Colpix Records in February of 1964, backed with La Corrida, a track co-written by Berry with Tony, Vic, and Manuel of the Matadors. But this is another fun song that successfully builds on the Drag City concept and exudes more of that youthful energy and attitude. It's good stuff. The next track, "Drag Strip Girl," was written by Jan Berry and Artie Kornfeld. Kornfeld would later come to fame as one of the organizers of the 1969 Woodstock Music Festival. For a short while in the early 60s, he was living with Jan Berry and made time to write songs with him during his stay. This particular tune slows things down a bit, reaching back towards the doo-wop stylings of earlier Jan and Dean recordings. The session was once again a host of Wrecking Crew regulars, drummer Hal Blaine, bass guitarist Ray Pullman, upright bassist and tuba player Jimmy Bond, guitarists Glenn Campbell, Al DeLore, Bill Pittman, and Tommy Tedesco, pianist Leon Russell, trumpet player Virgil Evans, French horn player William Hinshaw, saxophonists Steve Douglas and Tom Scott, and special guest Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys on piano. After a dynamic drum intro, the primary rhythm is much more relaxed, almost lilting. There's some fantastic horns pushing the song along with a relaxed energy. The lyrics tell us about the singer's titular drag strip girl, a lady with a clear knack for automobiles. Jan sings, "She's really got the touch, knows how to fix my clutch." And there's another great lyric about how she's not so great with hugs, but when she gaps my plugs, my engine never lugs. So there's plenty of humor sprinkled throughout. I like the song a whole lot. It's got a groovy, relaxed vibe and still fits in the album's overall drag concept. All the hot rod and drag themes. The next track, "Surfin' Hearse," was written by Jan Berry and Roger Christian. It's a very upbeat dedication to an unconventional set of wheels. You get a goofy set of lyrics about how the guys don't mind the car, but the girls have their reservations. Another about how it makes other Woodies look inferior, and people dig the purple velvet interior. And another yet about, I forget the rhyme, but he makes a joke about trying to get it to go over 35 miles per hour. And this may actually be my favorite song on the album. Musically, it does a great job of bridging the old and new eras of Jan and Dean. It has plenty of doo-wop stylings and vocals, but it still feels like a jangly surf pop and rock song. The backing vocals, again, are dynamite, and the leads are delivered with the classic Jan and Dean youthful irreverence. We get a wonderful dose of the quintessential bomp, bomp, bomp vocals that defined early Jan and Dean records. Also worthy of note is the fact that the song's introduction quotes the theme Dance of the Cuckoos by Marvin Hatley, best known as the theme song for comedy team Laurel and Hardy, who were longtime favorites of Jan Berry's. It would not be the last time that Dance of the Cuckoos would be quoted in Jan and Dean music. But the next track, Dead Man's Curve, was written by Jan Berry, Roger Christian, Artie Kornfeld, and Brian Wilson. Leading up to the album's release, Jan Berry would actually recut the song with a beefed-up arrangement, including more horns, strings, vocals, and car sound effects, of course. This second version would be released as a 45 RPM single in early December 1963, less than 2 weeks after the release of the earlier album version here. And the 45 RPM version would also see further release in April 1964 on the Dead Man's Curve and New Girl at School LP. The single would reach number 8 on the US Billboard Hot 100 charts, going on to become one of Jan and Dean's most enduring classic songs, and would go on to establish itself as something of a tragic premonition in the wake of Jan Berry's 1966 car accident. The tracking was done at the same session for Drag Strip Girl, featuring several of the LA Wrecking Crew session musicians, and also including a small assorted horn section, and special guest Brian Wilson. On this first album version here, Jan sings lead vocals, with background vocals sung by the trio of Jan, Brian Wilson, and Gary Usher. For the 45 version, they would recut the vocals, featuring a blend of Jan and Dean, with Brian, Roger Christian, and Artie Kornfeld. So it's definitely a little bit of a different vocal feel on both of these versions. But it's certainly, without even attempting to unpack all of the lore and mythos of the song, it's certainly one of Jan and Dean's greatest successes. An epic story of teenage tragedy, and once again, we get the popular dramatic spoken interlude from Jan in this spoken word passage describing the unforgettable, horrible sights that concluded his drag race. Along the way, the lyrics name-check several real streets and storefronts in Southern California, which is a very cool touch from the songwriting team. The song just has so much going for it, such a fully fleshed concept and grand arrangement, even before Jan's rearrangement for 45 RPM release. But it's all around one of the most successful of Jan's collaborative compositions. He, without question, Dead Man's Curve is a home run, a strike, whatever you want to call it. They knocked it out of the park. And of course, since it has become such an enduring classic and so, intricately tied to the Jan and Dean legacy, as I mentioned, especially after his accident, it's, I don't want to say a perfect song, but it's the perfect song for Jan and Dean. The next track, Schlock Rod Part One, is credited to Jan Berry, Roger Christian, Donald Altfeld, and Dean Torrance, the rare Dean Torrance songwriting credit. Starting with a jangly riff and adorned with soaring backing vocals, the song really defies all expectations as Dean sings about a car in decidedly inconsistent and off-key vocal delivery. Dean's vocals are almost unhinged as he describes his lopsided vehicle, an olive green 48 Buick, singing about how it burns cheap gas and always stalls, and about twin antennae, and about the spare tire in the trunk full of nails. As a extreme, it is definitely quite an extreme left turn in terms of both content and execution. The duo made clear their love of the bit, issuing the track as the B-side of the Drag City 45 RPM single in early November 1963, leading up to the release of the full-length Drag City album. The song has achieved something of an infamous status in the Jan and Dean fandom, somewhat indicative of the undercurrent of comedy that would fully manifest itself in 1966 with the long-time shelved Fillet of Soul project. Somewhat divisive in the fandom, some find the efforts for comedy excessive, arguing that the music suffers for the sake of the comedy. I myself enjoy just about all of the Jan and Dean shtick, even when it's amped up to 11, as I mentioned on the original Fillet of Soul project, but that's another discussion for another day. Schlock Rod has a standard enough arrangement, but the unhinged vocals and automobile workshop sound effects set it apart. Somewhat suddenly, the song unwinds to its conclusion as Jan and Dean continue to ramble, and we bring side 1 to a close. Side 2 actually picks right up where we left off, with Schlock Rod Part 2, credited this time to the trio of Jan Berry, Roger Christian, and Dean Torrance. The song slowly fades in, heavy on the workshop sound effects. Ushered in by the return of the backing harmony vocals, Dean sings about zipping around wet corners and stopping at the drugstore for a sody. But this time the backing vocals sing different things in response to the lyrics sung by Dean, or Jan. After Dean sings about getting passed up by the chicks, the backing vocalists sing, I believe they sing, Tough Shift. But boy, it sounds like they're singing tough shit. He contemplates that the girls don't think he has much class, Dean does, and the backing vocalists sing, who cares? Not me. It's great fun stuff. Dean concludes that he'll go along and pick up some chickadees, but Jan warns him that they don't seem too interested. Dean tries to catch them in his schlock rod, but we hear Jan comment that they're running kind of fast. The duo keep rambling as the track plays out, and Dean starts making some wacky noises. And once again, the track comes to a sudden ending. Though certainly not among Jan Berry's most sophisticated compositions, Schlock Rod Parts 1 and 2 are important pieces of the Jan and Dean story, self-aware productions that poke fun at the very hot rod and drag racing culture that the duo were capitalizing on with this album. As I said earlier, this style of quasi-musical comedy would continue to be a strong undercurrent in the body of Jan and Dean's work, and ultimately their identity, as they've been referred to as the pranksters, the jesters, or the clown princes of rock and roll. All in all, it's good, silly fun, and that's what matters. The next track, Popsicle Truck, was written by Nashville singer and songwriters Buzz Cason and Bobby Russell. The initial tracking session for this version dates back to early 1963, but the song's first release would be on this album. A showcase for more of the classic Jan and Dean bump 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 vocals. Jan really lays down the bumps like it's machine gun fire. It's impressive, honestly. Another fun, youthful song and content. Jan sings about relaxing after school with his baby and getting to choose from all sorts of flavors of popsicle sticks for him and his chick. We get another verse about giving the leftover popsicle sticks to younger siblings so they can build a popsicle house. And another verse yet encouraging listeners to save their popsicle wrappers for a rebate to win a phonograph they could use to play this very record on. It's silly, it's fun, it's cute. It's a time capsule, in a somewhat different way than the rest of the album. And on that note, this honestly is the only song on the album that veers away from the main Drag City album concept. But it's still a great song, again, with fantastic vocals. I can't get over Jan laying down those bumps like machine gun fire. It's crazy. The next track, Surf Route 101, was written by Jan Berry, Roger Christian, and Brian Wilson. Tracked at the same session for Dead Man's Curve and Drag Strip Girl. It features the same host of Wrecking Crew musicians and horn players, and allegedly Brian Wilson. It's a very relaxed but still upbeat song with a driving rhythm. This is another one of my favorites on the album. The harmony vocals do feel very much out of a Beach Boys song. You can feel the presence of Brian Wilson's writing. That said, the overall arrangement is very in step with Jan's work, and the spoken word bridges with Jan and Jill Gibson trading lines is classic Jan and Dean stuff. That said, Jill Gibson does a dynamite job of sounding sultry as possible. When she says, "I dig your Woody, lover, let's disappear." It's good stuff. Jan name checks a food stop called the Sugar Shack, but this is actually a reference to the song Sugar Shack by Jimmy Gilmer and the Fireballs, released as a 45 RPM single in May of 1963 on Dot Records. The main theme of the song, Surf Route 101, would borrow heavily from Sugar Shack. I'd actually not heard it until I was doing the research for this video, and I checked it out, and it definitely, like, this whole main theme is straight out of that Sugar Shack song. Like, I'm very surprised they didn't get struck for copyright. But in any case, there's another spoken word bridge where Jill says they tandemed on her board, but got wiped out twice, to which Jan comments, "But taking gas with this chick was really pretty nice." Cracks me up every time. Again, a very warm and relaxed feeling track. It's, there's great use of the horns, just pushing the song along with a carefree energy. It's one of the highlights of the album for me, for sure. And the following track, Stingray, was co-written by Jan and Dean engineer Bones Howe and Gene Sharp. Originally recorded and issued as a 45 RPM single by the Rooters in June of 1963. This Jan and Dean version, in this version, it is still essentially an instrumental, though we're treated to scattered spoken word banter from the Matadors, mostly in Spanish, about Jan and Dean's cars. Truly the odd inside joke-based humor that would come to define Jan and Dean. It's not an essential cut, but it's a fun, high-energy instrumental, the only instrumental on this album, and it's got enough going for it to keep it interesting in spite of its simplicity. There isn't any crazy guitar wankery going on, and again, the random ramblings are in Spanish, so unless you're either bilingual or, have a translator handy sitting with you while you listen to the record, you're not going to really know what they're saying, other than the fact that it has something to do with cars. But it's good stuff. It's fun stuff, and it's it makes for an enjoyable listen. The next track, Little Deuce Coupe, is a cover of the then still recently released Beach Boys hit single, written by Brian Wilson and Roger Christian. For the Jan and Dean version here, Jan would employ drummer Hal Blaine, guitarists Glenn Campbell, Al DeLore, David Gates, Bill Pittman, Billy Strange, and Tommy Tedesco, bass guitarist Ray Pullman, and pianist Leon Russell. At the same session, Jan led the group through a recording of the Beach Boys song Shutdown as well, but that remains unreleased. In any case, this cover is fairly straightforward, basically true to Brian's original arrangement for the song. And once again, the Matadors provide stellar backing vocals. They really were tight vocally, and are a felt presence throughout this album. The next track, Hot Stalker, was written by Jan Berry with Roger Christian and Artie Kornfeld. Tracked at the same session for Drag City, Drag Strip Girl, and Surf Route 101, giving us another stellar arrangement for the brass and woodwinds by Jan. And this is also another personal highlight of the album, in my opinion. It just exudes more of that confidence and youthful attitude that I mentioned earlier, that permeates so many of the album's songs. There's so many punchline style lyrics in the song that I have to confess I just adore. You know, look, she looks pretty square at first inspection, but she really scrams with fuel injection. And a lyric like a quarter mile ET 10.9, that 57 Chevy is nothing but fine. It's cheesy, but it's genuine, and that's what counts. With the horns still pumping away, the song fades out, and we close side 2. So, final thoughts. Arguably one of the strongest albums of the classic Jan and Dean run. I know I said that about Little Old Lady, but man, they are both strong albums. And the duo star was really rising here in the wake of their number 1 hit single, Surf City, released 6 months prior. The Drag City album would peak at number 22 on the U.S. Billboard album charts, making a 14-week stay. It featured 2 top 10 hit singles, if one includes the early album version of Dead Man's Curve. And plus, in 1966, Popsicle would be reissued as a 45 RPM single, promoting the album that would be released after Jan's accident, of which Popsicle would be the title track. So if you include that, there are 3 singles, and when it was issued as a 45, Popsicle barely missed the top 20. So it's got a couple strong singles and a selection of very strong album cuts with very accomplished arrangements. It's as I mentioned with the Little Old Lady album, there's a lot of very sophisticated arrangements on this album. And with this one, Jan doesn't quite have what I would refer to as super sophisticated arrangements, but they're very strong, very full. You could see the progress that he was still making, building and experimenting with more advanced arrangements. So it's, much as I often speak about watching the trajectory of Brian Wilson's evolution as a songwriter, producer, and arranger, you get some of that here with Jan Berry's trajectory between this album and his later works. Even though I'm sure there are many people that would argue about how he never reached the highs of Brian Wilson, and I'm not here to debate that, but I enjoy the highs that Jan Berry did reach. But in any case, the album also succeeds as a concept album. Each song, except Popsicle Truck really, centered around hot rods and drag racing, or at least automobiles in some fashion. We even have multiple songs that refer to the titular Drag City, so that conceptual continuity is appreciated and goes a long way towards the overall concept. And the constant automobile jargon from Roger Christian, as with his collaborations with Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, give these songs a sense of legitimacy. The references and instances of shorthand are both specific and casual. It's definitely worth noting that Roger Christian is credited on 9 of the album's 12 tracks, one more than even Jan Berry himself. and Brian Wilson would be credited with co-writing 3 of the album's tracks. So Jan was clearly making the most of all collaborations that were afforded to him in this time. The Matadors, on that note, who had sung backing vocals for the majority of the album, and had their previous 2 45 RPM singles produced and arranged and co-written by Jan Berry, would part ways after this with Jan and Dean. They would re-sign with Reprise Records and later rename themselves the Sinners. This would leave an opening that would eventually be filled by P.F. Sloan and Steve Barry of the Fantastic Baggies. But that's a story for another day. So here's a closer look at the album cover. Got some glare from the window. Let's see if I can cover that up here. Closer look at the album cover here with less glare. It's a very cool shot of Jan and Dean looking, real tough, real hip, just standing by a drag strip. And you got the songs listed here. Of course, not in sequence at all, but at least you know what songs are on the album. Back cover has a very cool illustration, of some drag racing going on here, with some standard early 60s album liner notes. This time they are by Roger Christian, so at least it's, liner notes by somebody that's involved in the project, since he wrote most of the album songs, or co-wrote most of the album songs, I should say. Inside we got the good old Liberty Records inner sleeve, Wonderful World of Liberty Records. And then the label here is your standard Liberty early 60s label with the rainbow side band and the gold Statue of Liberty. Nothing too wild or crazy to write home about. But all things considered, this album, even as a Jan and Dean fan myself, I used to kind of underrate it. But listening to it a few times in preparation for this review really reminded me how much strong stuff is on here. And even though, Jan and Dean are one of those bands where some of their songs are, reused for some albums later, there's a couple songs on here, like I said, that wind up on, like, the Popsicle album in 1966. But the fact that they were first issued here really speaks to the strength of the Drag City concept and album in its drafting. And it really amazes me just how many different people Jan Berry brought into his creative process, whether it be in terms of writing with people like Roger Christian, Gary Usher, Artie Kornfeld, Donald Altfeld, Brian Wilson, or, doing his recording with so many of the Wrecking Crew. Hal Blaine was practically Jan Berry's right-hand man. And the focus for the overall concept on this album of Drag City is impressive. So all in all, this is a very strong album, and I do not hesitate at all to rate it easily 8 out of 10. So let me know in the comments below, are you familiar with the Drag City album? I would hope you're at least vaguely familiar with Jan and Dean, since I've discussed them a bit before. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear any anecdotes that anyone might have about this album, or Jan and Dean, or any of the surf and drag culture that we have been discussing as of late. I appreciate any and all viewership. Keep tuning in, because I'll keep them coming at you. This has been Matthew Buckley Talks Music with Drag City by Jan and Dean. Music is the best.